Hey everyone, my name is Dave. Welcome to NTD Racing. Right now we are in what we call the Amateur Hour Garage. It's my buddy Caleb's garage, and we're working on our new Class 11 Volkswagen Bug that will be racing at the Mint 400. So we've been doing a lot of videos of this car, and you've seen it drive, you've seen it do all those things, but now we're starting to do all of the modifications. We have race seats for it, we got a Jazz fuel cell, King shocks are on the way, but we got to get a roll cage, measure it up for this thing before we pull the body off and do a lot of the work to the suspension and the engine that we need to get done. So what today is all about is I'm going to show you exactly how we go through taking the measurements from the inside of the car, how we put those into the Bentech CAD software to basically design an entire roll cage. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that CAD program, we're going to drop it into Dragon CAM, cut out all those tubes on Bentech's Dragon A250, and then we're going to use Harbor Freight's Vulcan welder to TIG weld the whole thing together. I think you're going to like it. A lot of stuff to do. Let's get to it. All right, let's take a look at our starting point for this thing. You see, we kind of have some seats mocked up in here. I do have the fuel tank in the back, just to kind of make sure it's going to fit in general, but most importantly, locating the seat where it's going to be. So the first thing I want to do is I want to set the Bug up such that it is its own level reference. So what I did is I'm using some scissor jacks. I got one over here, one all the way on the other side, and you kind of see I have one on the front. So that's 3 scissor jacks, and these two kind of do the x-axis left and right, and this one kind of does the y-axis up and down. And inside the car, I'm just going to use the floor pan. That's going to be my level reference inside the car, and that is level. And then on the other side of the car, the x-axis over here, I'm using the windowsills. These seem to be pretty symmetric, so I'm going to go ahead and use those, and you can see that is level, and that's a good starting point. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a system inside the vehicle such that I can accurately use this whole level system to pull dimensions off of the car. Let me do it, and I'll come back and show you what I'm talking about. All right, let me bring you in here and I will show you what I put in. So this is basically what I call a level playing field, if you will, so I can get accurate X, Y, and Z coordinates. So what I have is this is the same angle aluminum that I get usually from Home Depot, and I have this set up on just these wooden blocks. The reason I use these wooden blocks is because I had to get it over top of the tunnel. So if you don't have a tunnel in whatever car you're doing a roll cage in, you don't need that, but in a VW Bug, this is what's going to help me out. And then so I did is I made this piece right here completely level with these blocks. I just used some wood screws through the aluminum into the wood there once I had it level. And then I also set this piece of aluminum as close as I could from the center of the tunnel. And for the tunnel, I just kind of eyeballed where I thought the center was, and I put some marks down there. Once this one was level, I basically duplicated it on the other side. I ran a piece of angle aluminum across it. I put a level on there, and I made that one absolutely level with this one. So both of these are level with the car and level with each other. And then from there, we're just going to use some simple tools to pull some X, Y, Z coordinates. And so what you really have to do is you got to kind of figure out what are going to be your 0 points. Where are you going to start from? So, you know, as far as the x-axis from left to right, what I'm going to use is my 0 point will be the center of the car. And the reason I'm using that is because this thing is pretty symmetrical. I've done measurements all over, and it appears as if the left side of the car is exactly the same as the right side of the car. So I can basically take measurements on one side, maybe do a rough verification on the other side, but when I put those into Bentech as pick points, I can just say measure one side and then duplicate it on the other side, and that'll save me a lot of time and make it easy to do those. So the center, the 0 point for X will be at the center of the car. The center point for Y is just arbitrary. What I did is I just started it right at the beginning of the aluminum. So as I measure from the front to the back of the car, it's basically going to be from the start of this piece of aluminum, which shouldn't move the whole time I'm working on the car. Even when I pull the body, this is going to stay inside the car. And then the Z axis is one you have to remember when you have these axes at. It's going to start at the top right here of this piece of angle aluminum, which I use to take all of those measurements. Let me take one measurement, and we've taken this a couple times, so let me take one measurement, and then I will just kind of show you how I go through the process of getting these accurate measurements. All right, now that I've got everything together, this is the money part. This is where, you know, I kind of give you some techniques, and you can use these basically for building any roll cage inside of a vehicle. is how do you take the dimensions? And this is kind of like just some basics, but you need to be able to accurately find your X, Y, and Z, or your front to back, left and right, and up and down, or top and bottom, I think is what they use in BendTech. So what I first did is I had my seats inside here, and we also had the fuel cell. And we sat inside, we figured out exactly where we wanted to be in relation to the pedal, the steering wheel, and all those things. And then we figured out where we want the back of our B pillar to go. Using all of the race regulations, generally about 3 inches from any roll bar tube to your head is what you need to have, or your helmet, while you're in the seated position is what's required. So with that, we figured out that right about this seam right here is where we're going to have the top of the B pillar. So to identify those pieces, I'll show you the tools I'm going to use so I can identify all of the X, Y, and Z axes for that. So first I'm going to start with a plumb bob. This is my grandpa's old plumb bob, and I'm going to run it up to that point, or along that line, about the highest point that makes sense to me along there that I want this roll cage to sit. And while I'm doing this, I'm really paying attention to a few things. Realize that due to just the nature of the VW Bug, we're going to take the body off and then we're going to build the roll cage. So we really have to think about how the body is going to come back down over the top of the roll cage. If it's too far wide or anything like that, the body's just not going to fit over top of it. So I need to be cognizant of that, especially where the body's going to land somewhere down here around the tub. So as I'm bringing down these points, I'm making sure they all fall inside of the tub. So what I did is I put the plumb bob to where I want that roll cage, those 2 tubes that come and terminate, and we start that bend right there. And I made an X exactly where that's going to be. And then I took this piece of angle aluminum, which wasn't there before. I slid it in there. I put it right up to the side of this string so that this point right here, which represents the X axis and the Y axis, is right underneath the point that it's supposed to be to make that accurate. I use my speed square, which is out of my reach right now, otherwise I'd show you, and then I clamp this thing down in place. And once we had that, I can remove the plumb bob, and then now I just need to be able to find the dimensions accurately for that Z axis. So what I made is this thing right here. This is just a really simple square out of some angle aluminum. I put some rivets in it so that it would hold the dimensions. And what I do is I run this over top of the Y axis and realize that the bottom of this is riding on the top of this. The top of this is 0, so the bottom of this is my 0 point for the Z axis. And then I take my other piece of angle aluminum, which I had to cut a couple of these such that they were the right length inside here. They're pretty cheap though. Like I said, I get these from Home Depot. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to run it right up along the outside of this square right here. And if I run it square and I run it straight up, it should pretty much fall on that X that I marked in there before, because remember, it's plumb from where I used my plumb bob. Once it's all in place and I'm happy with that position, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, as best I can, grip this piece of angle aluminum, grip both of them together, and without them moving, as best I can make it happen, is I am going to take my pencil and I'm going to mark a line where those 2 pieces of angle aluminum come together. Sometimes it's easier to do this with 2 sets of hands. Once I have that mark, it does 2 things. One is it allows me to, like if it moves, I can visually see where I got to move it back to. But 2 is I make a couple marks there because I'm going to take this measurement 3 or 4 times. All those marks should fall within about 1/8 of an inch of each other as I take these dimensions. From there, once I've got the mark on there, I'm going to take my tape measure from the tip of this thing. I'm going to measure the side. About 37 inches is what I had before. So once I get 37 inches 3 or 4 times taking the measurements, I'll be happy with that, and I'll know that this is accurate and repeatable for this process. And then I'll just go ahead and do the same thing over and over again. And just kind of, big picture as far as what we're designing in here, this will be where the B pillar is. It's going to actually kick out a little bit as far as this tube that comes across and connects the A and the B pillar. It's going to go right down the line of the door, and then it's going to meet up right here for there's going to be another A pillar hoop that's going to go all the way over. That tube will match up right there. So we had to take some dimensions inside here for where this point was for the A pillar, this point up here, this point for the B pillar, and I would take one more point for over here. I need to take one more point over here for where the shoulder harnesses are going to go. And then once we have all those points and we're pretty happy with the accuracy and the repeatability of those, then we're ready to take the body off this Bug and start doing all the other work we got to do to it. All right, we have the chassis in the speed shop now. I have some heat, that makes it a little bit nicer, but I also get a chance to take a better look at how this whole thing is going to flow. And I've seen some other roll cages. I've seen how some guys have done it, and I probably kind of mimic that a little bit, and then we're going to do some things differently. One of the big things that we're going to do different is that this entire roll cage that I'm designing will be able to be completely fabricated without the body on, and then we're going to try to kind of shoehorn the body on. We'll see how that works. I might have some issues around here in the back where we might have it welded all together and then gotta cut it back off and then put it back on. That won't be that big of an issue, but hopefully we'll be able to just kind of basically bring the body in and then slide it on like that. So what I need to get right now are all the pick points, or all the X, Y, and Z coordinates for the tubes that are going to run along the bottom of the chassis. The way it's going to go is from the front beam over here. It's going to kind of slide right over this member right here. There'll be 2 bolts that come up through here. So I want it to slide right up through here. We'll clear it into the body. It'll come down the body line. It'll make a bend here. It'll make a bend down there. And then it'll go right back here to this back torsion tube, whatever you want to call that. And so this thing's going to have like 3 bends in it. It's going to be 1, 2, and 3, which means I need 5 points, the end point, all the bend points, and then another end point. So what we're going to do is, since we've already got this thing on here, which we put on with the body on, but we designed it specifically such that we could all take the body off without interfering with it. Now we can just take the measurements using the exact same coordinate system and the exact same references for the top of the cage on the bottom of the cage, and we'll start up here with this front beam. All right, let's talk about the beam and how we're going to represent this as far as dimensions goes. We basically have just 2 parallel tubes, and so what we want to put into BendTech is a tube, and then I can basically make the other tubes terminate on that as far as the beam goes. So what I did is I extended the parallel angle aluminum off of the front, is clamped it on there, and then now it's kind of sitting over here. And now how do I measure to a tube? Because what I want to find is the center. Well, the first thing I want to do is I'm using my calipers here, and I want to find, well, what is the diameter of the tube that we're going to measure? So I open this thing up and I put it over the top of that thing, and I come up with it. It's a 2-inch tube. 2.05 is what I get for the diameter of that tube. So now I know that I can measure up to the side of the tube, and I can either subtract or add to find the center of that tube. So first let's start with, let's just start with the easier one, which would be the Z-axis. So I need to measure, kind of keeping with what I was using as far as measuring the Z-axis. I know that the 0 point was the top of this piece of angle aluminum. So I want to get something, I have a level that I can put on the bottom of that tube. I can check it until it is level, and once it's level, I can put the tape measure against there, and then to the top of my reference, and that gives me about 10.5. So that's 10.5 inches from the bottom of the tube. But to get to the center of the tube, I need to go ahead and mark down that I'm going to go with 9.5 inches. The second would be the Y-axis, forward and back. Again, I take my level, I bring it up to the tube. I'm going to get a pencil this time. And once I have let me put it this side so I can get the level in front of my eyeballs here. Once I see that the tube is level and it's up against the front of that bottom tube, I could use the back side. It's just this top tube and the beam is interfering with it. I'm going to go ahead and mark this now on my piece of angle aluminum, and then again take my tape measure. I go all the way back to that original 0 point, which is the front of that original piece of aluminum there, and then I measure it and I get 32 and about a half. So again, 32 and a half to the front of the beam to find the center. It needs to be 31 and a half. I'll go ahead and mark that one down. And then the other part will be the X-axis. So, you know, assuming that this thing is symmetric and I'm pretty close on all the measurements, what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure in between these 2 shock towers and about the weldable area that I would have there. I'm just going to measure, and I'm going to get, I don't know, about 29 inches. And I can use that point for the pick point, just remembering that when I go and land the tube, I've got to put other points inside there about 3/4 of an inch. I'll probably put an inch for a little bit of slop. So that whole piece will be 29.5. So math in public, that'd be 14 3/4 inches, which will be that pick point on both sides. And then when I go to land the tube, it'll be 13 3/4 is where the center of the other tube will land. And that'll make sense when I go ahead and put that into the pick points. Let's go ahead now and find those pick points, which will run inside the pan. Okay, for the tubes that are inside the pan, here's what's going through my brain. I have just some tubes at the same size I'll be using, scrap, whatever that I'm laying down inside there. I'm probably gonna give myself about 1/2 inch of slop all the way around for this roll cage. I kind of brought these two together. Realize when you do a pick point should be the junction of the straight lines of the original tubes. Now, when we put the bend in BendTech, it's actually going to make a bend, so it actually won't go through this point. It'll be a little bit further inset, and that'd be a little more obvious when it's a 90-degree bend. A more shallow bend, not so much. So I, again, grab my plumb bob off of the end of this point right down to the junction of those two tubes. That will be my Z axis. And then from the tip here to the center, there's my X. And then I'll just measure from this end to my 0 point on my Y axis to get my Y. Now, something I am thinking about as I continue this is how will my seats mount? Where does the bottom of this roll cage really have to go? And just as I'm kind of looking at how I'm going to interface the seat mounts with the center of this chassis, I need to kind of have the tube at the same height where it can kind of come across where you see this little indent. So what I will probably do is start right here by raising that tube almost an inch off of the floor pan and then have it continuing uphill until it gets back to this second bend right back over here. And this bend can be a little bit high because it's got to actually go to this tube, and you can see the difference is maybe about 3 or 4 inches. There's no reason not to bring that tube up kind of closer to the height of that bend. And this is going to make sense later on, but the higher this tube is, the easier it's going to be for me to bring the other tube up to make the shock mount above the where the new King shocks are going to go. So I'm just going to add 1 inch there, and then when I come over here, it's probably going to be about just level with that little indent in the center tube to make it easy to mount the seats and then also to alleviate the problems I'm going to have for the rear shock mount. This rear tube, I'm going to do it exactly the same as I did the front tube, and now I got all of the points in here to make pick points. Let's go to the computer and BendTech and let's build this roll cage in BendTech and make some pick points. All right, so this is what they call Dragon CAD, computer-aided design, or they just call it the Bentech software. And if you were to buy anything, like say you had a choice between a tube notcher or the Dragon CAD or the Bentech software, I would always pick the Bentech software. I'll show you why. It is basically the most versatile piece of equipment that you could have in your garage because there's a wide range of just the basic software to the most advanced software where you can do stuff like this, where I built an entire roll cage for our race truck called Lefty. And I cut all these tubes out. And once you've done all of the hard work, the dimensioning and all those kinds of things, from this point, you drop this into your Dragon Cam and your Dragon A250 and you're printing money at this point. If you're making these things for other people, whether it be for a side-by-side or something like that. So I did use this software just recently for making a roll cage for my little boy side-by-side on his Razor 200 EFI. And I'll be referring back to that from time to time. But today what we're doing is we're going to make a new assembly. So I'm going to file new assembly, and it shows up with a blank sheet here. Just to kind of orient you as to what's going on here. I talked about while I was taking dimensions X, Y, and Z. And what that correlates to here is the Z is ceiling and floor, up and down. You got left and right for the X, and then you got back and forth for the Y. So pretty simple math there. This is the center origin, and this point in our vehicle is the center of the car, just underneath the dashboard on that little kind of on the tunnel there. So
That's where that is in relation to everything else. And we're going to be building the pick points based on that point right there for the entire car. Now, the pick points are just these points that we're going to put on here that are going to define either straight tubes, or a couple pick points will define a bent tube, and that'll make more sense as we kind of go through it. So I'm going to start from the front of the car. I'm going to work towards the back of the car. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the pick points in that will define that beam that's going to be on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start putting in the numbers. It was that beam, I'm going to define it as left and right by 14.5 inches. 0.5 inches. It went towards the front, 31.312 inches, and then it went down towards the floor, 9.312 inches. And then I'm going to hit apply. And as I zoom out, you can see there is the first pick point that it applied. Now, most of the pick points on this one are mirrored from left to right, except for the beam. I think it was bent. It must have been in a wreck or something like that, because the front distance is going to be a little bit different, but the left and right are going to be the same. So you see it's 14.5 over here on the left. If I click right, boom, there's 14.5 on the right side. And then as far as the front goes, it's going to go from that 5/16 down to a 3/16 or 0.1875, and then the same distance down to the floor. And then now I'm going to hit apply, and then now it's going to put in that second pick point that's in there. Just so we don't get a little lost, I'm going to go ahead and put in a couple more pick points so it all makes sense as we continue along. I'm going to clear all the values, and we'll continue working back from there. So every time you make a new pick point, don't forget, clear the values. All right, we're going to make that first point that's back, which is going to be that first bend as it goes through the firewall into the footwell of the vehicle. And I'll just start going through all of the points. All right, so I've got all of these pick points in there from the front to the rear of the car. And then now let's go ahead and just define the front beam and that rear torsion tube. That front beam was a 2-inch tube. So I'm going to just pick any 2-inch tube because it doesn't matter. I'm not obviously cutting that tube. I just need to cut the other tubes in relation to it. I'm going to pick a straight tube, and then from those two pick points, I'm going to connect those two together. And then in the back, now that was a different size tube. That is a tube I don't have in my library necessarily, or maybe I put it in there. There it is right there. It's called the rear tube. Now what I did is I went to my tools, I went to my tube library, and I created a new tube with it didn't matter what side my wall thickness was. I called it a rear tube, but it is 2.59 inches. And that is important again, because the other tubes are going to be cut in relation to this tube. So I just need to define it. And then, and so I'm going to go ahead now and select that rear tube. And that's just going to be back here in the back of the vehicle. Now, one other thing is I define that tube as being like 14 inches from left to right. But really where I want my bent tubes, the tubes I'm really going to cut to land, are about 3/4 of an inch inside of that. And that I made that 3/4 of an inch because that's 1/2 inch and a half. And that allows it to cope the entire tube around the tube that I'm cutting in relation to. And so what I need to do is I need to make some more pick points. I need to do the pick point along a line. So you select the reference, here's the line, and then it's going to be 0.75 inches. And if I zoom in, I can see that it's in the right direction, it's towards the center of the vehicle. And then I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to select the reference again, or I could swap ends, I guess. And I'm going to select the reference, zoom in. That's exactly where I want it to go. And then now I have another pick point that is 0.75 inches, or half of my 1.5 inch tube to the inside. Now I'm going to do the same to this one. I'm going to say select the reference, and here got that tube. I zoom in, I see, yep, that's exactly what I want. I'm going to hit apply, Let me see if I swap ends. Yep, there you go. Check out that. And I hit apply. Now I got those points. Now I have all the points that I want to define the tubes. If I go to main right now, you can kind of see there's that front tube, there's that rear torsion tube. Now if I go and I say I want to make a bend, but what I have to do first is I have to pick the tubes that I'm going to use. I'm going to use this 1.5 inch DOM with a 0.09 wall. And then when I made the tube and I calibrated it, I called it a 0.1 inch wall. It's actually a 0.095 wall is what I used here. But this is 1.5 inch die with a 4.5 inch radius. I'm going to select that. Now I'm going to say bend. Now remember that those tubes that go along the bottom of the vehicle have 3 bends in it. They use 5 points. I'm going to put 3 bends. I'm going to say okay. And now I'm just going to connect the dots. Now you need to make sure you grab the right dot. So it's going to be that one there. It's going to be this one, this one, this one. And I zoom in, it's going to be that one. I'm going to say okay. And then it's going to be the same on the other side. I kind of tilt myself up so I can see it a little bit better. I'm going to make a bend. A tube's going to have 3 bends in it. I'm going to say okay. I'm going to go and select that one, that one, that one, this one, and then zoom in, make sure I get the right one, and I get that one. And now I'm going to say okay. And then now we can go back over here and say, click pick points back to main. And now we see those tubes. And if you want to kind of QC that you're doing the right thing, is I'm going to go over here to projection. I'm going to project it from the left. And those 2 tubes should be completely superimposed on each other when I project. And if I project it from the top, then it should look symmetric. And that's kind of a way, if it was, let's say I projected it from the left and I can see parts of the tube behind it, I've done something wrong. If I'm trying to make a mirror image from left to right, if I'm not trying to do that, then obviously you would see the other tube on the other side. Now we can go ahead and start putting in the pick points for the top. And that is done the exact same way, just using the dimensions that we pulled before we pulled the body off the vehicle. So now we have a whole bunch more pick points in here. And if I project it from the left, you can kind of start to see here is a pillar, here is a B pillar back over here. It's going to be the hoop on top. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make first this A pillar. And here's something you need to be careful with, is we're going to go ahead and make a bend. This is going to have 1 bend, 2, 3, 4 bends. So I'm going to say bend. I got all those same dies in there. I'm going to say 4 bends, and I'm going to say okay. Now this bend, this tube right here is going to start from this bend. So what you need to do is you need to make sure as you zoom in here, you see you can either click on the pick point, and the pick point, remember, is the straight line from this tube and this tube. The bend does not go through the pick point. So you got to bring it in here until you see that you are connected to the tube. And this is telling you that you're at the apex of the tube, which basically correlates with that pick point. So I'm going to select that point right there is the first point on this tube. We're going to make this A pillar. Now we're going to go to the point right next to the steering wheel. We're going to go to the top of the A pillar, across the top of the vehicle, back down to the bottom or other side, underneath the windshield, and then back to this side of the tube. We want to zoom in here again and make sure we're picking the tube. If not, it's going to cut a really weird end of this tube when you try to make it. I'm going to say okay, and then now you'll kind of see as I zoom out there. Now you're kind of seeing, oh hey, there is the pillar. And as I move this thing around, I'm getting kind of lost. So again, I'm just going to go projection left. And now I see not only is it superimposed on each other, if I go to main, now I kind of tilt it over. That looks like the A pillar. You can kind of see where the windshield is going to be right here. Now we're going to do the same thing for the B pillar. All right, now as we continue going through this, now this roll cage is starting to materialize here. Some other things that we can do, which is kind of cool, is we need a tube that goes across the center here for this cage. So I'm going to just say a straight tube, and I can kind of bring my cursor over here, and it should snap to the center of that tube, and it'll snap to the center of that tube to help you out as you make this thing. And then we're going to have another tube that goes underneath the windshield, underneath the the windshield here and also the steering wheel. Again, scroll and make sure you're grabbing the apex of that tube bend there to this one. And then now this thing is really starting to look like a roll cage. Now we got to put the back part in and you'll start to see how it's coming together. All right, and then one other little trick I'm doing here is I want to put this tube across here that's going to represent the where the shoulder belts are going to connect behind the driver and the navigator. That was a line, just like I did before. I picked a line and it's 20 inches above from the bottom. Now what I need to do is I needed to intersect this cross tube here because these are going to be this tube is going to be continuous. These tubes are going to be two individual tubes that will join there in the center. So what I did is I said at the intersection, I picked this point, and that tube. And then now I'm going to go ahead and apply a pick point. It's going to put it there. And then now when I go and make two straight tubes from there to there and there to there, it's going to be one tube. And if I project it from the rear, or the back, you can kind of see now that's one straight tube that goes all the way across. This is where the seat backs are going to be, and this is where the seat belts are going to land on this thing. And if we can kind of now take a look at this thing from the back, this is what it looks like. As we rotate it, you can kind of see what this roll cage is going to look like. This roll cage is going to look a little different, I think, than some other people have. Because this part right here is kind of floating out here in space and the shocks are going to fall right on this triangulated thing. I might actually add in a tube just because when in doubt, let me see, I'm going to escape out of that. I'm going to pick points back to straight. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to pick this point and make sure I get this point. When in doubt, make a triangle. I think we need one right there and right there. And then the last one we need a tube, and this one I might actually put in later, but I need a tube that goes from this point right here, and it's going to go right down to this point here, and likewise it's going to go on the other side. Now, what I might do is I might hold off on making these until I have the roll cage in the car and have the seats in there because they might have to kick out just slightly to keep from hitting the seats and also the door. But just realize as you kind of project this thing from the top and you look down, all these things need to fit inside the body of the vehicle as it slides down over top of it. So that's why I kind of, those dimensions are a little bit narrow, but project this thing from the left, you can kind of see everything is mostly superimposed except for that top tube, which you kind of see there. There we go. And this is what the roll cage is going to look like. I still need to do one more tube right here, straight tube from there, I think down to there. That might actually not be in the rolls. I'll see if I actually have to put that tube in there. I might just for good measure, but it's really just not required, I think, in this class since it's a full body. We're just not going that fast and those kinds of things. Okay, so the next part of this is figuring out what our cut order is going to be and how we're going to cut this thing. So in general, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the bottom and cut all the tubes to the bottom, and then I'll start working my way up with the A and the B pillar, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that here. So I will start first here by saying cutting. I'm going to do a new cut. I want to cut this tube right here, and I want to cut it in relation to that tube. And now you can kind of see, as I say, complete the cut, you'll see why I had to extend this thing 3/4 of an inch further out, and maybe I could have done it more just so I could define that full cut there. And then I'm going to go and do the other side of that tube. I'll say new cut. I'm going to cut this tube right here in relation to this one. And I actually did have to go in and extend this one out. I originally had it out here. I had to extend another 1/2 inch just so I get that full cut in there. If I didn't do that, you'll see a big notch out of here, which is not what I want. I want it to be cut exactly to that torsion tube that's that right there. Now we'll do the same thing for the other side. All right, so now we have all 4 of those cuts which make up the bottom tube. Now let's figure out some cut order. When I weld this thing together, I'm going to be putting in this tube and this tube before I put in the A and B pillar. So basically, those tubes will terminate completely on the bottom tube. So we'll make those cuts right now. All right, so now what you need to think about is cut order. as I do a new cut, I'm going to cut this tube, which is part of that A pillar, and I'm going to cut it in relation, of course, to this tube down here. But remember, when I bring this A pillar down, this tube will be there, so it needs to be cut in relation to that one also. And you can kind of see the profile here. These lines here are cut in relation to the bottom tube. But if I didn't put this tube here until it cut in relation to that, then there would be a piece here that I have to cut off later on. So you can kind of see that profile there representing that. And so now we can do the same thing as we go all on the other side. So now we've cut those three ends and we're dealing with this piece over here. Here's something to think about, is that this tube right here, and it'll make more sense if I bring it in here, this cross tube is going to be a solid tube. It goes from here to here. If I weld in this full box and bring that tube down there, I will never be able to get that tube in there without doing some weird bending and those kinds of things. So I need to account for this tube before I weld in that tube. So basically what I have to do is I'll have to this tube will be welded in. I could have this one even tacked in, but I'm gonna have to come in here and weld this one completely around. So the next tube that comes in order here is going to be this cross tube. So as I go into cutting and say new cut, I need to think about what's going to be there when I cut this one. This tube's going to be there, that tube's going to be there, and that tube's going to be there. That one's going to be there. I'm going to complete that cut, and you can see that one right there. But then now, as I do a new cut, and I bring in this tube here, well, this tube's going to be there, that piece, that piece, that piece, and now that piece is going to be there. And you can see, look at the big piece that would not be cut out if I forgot to put that tube in there. So basically, I'll weld this cross tube in there completely, and then I'm going to bring this one in, the B pillar, and weld that one all the way around. And so you kind of see, you really got to think about the order of your cuts and how your tubes are going to go in before you do them. So we'll continue around the halo up here. All right, another part to deal with here is how do you deal with all of these down here, these pieces? Well, again, you just kind of have to think about how they're going to go together. And I will generally just kind of start from one and work my way up or down, however it's going to be. In this case, let's just work our way to the top. So I'm going to say a new cut in this case. I'm going to cut this one in relation to this tube, and this tube's going to get the full cope all the way around, and that one will be there, the first one there. And then I'm going to say a new cut. I'm going to cut this tube in relation to this tube, but now that tube will already be there. And I'm going to say complete, and you'll see that profile. And then I'm going to say a new cut again. I'm going to cut this tube, and now this tube, and that tube will already be there. And I'm going to say complete. Now realize that this tube right here never really touches this one, but it never hurts to pick a couple extra tubes, especially if you know they're going to be there, because you never know when it just kind of wraps around and touches that tube, and you just didn't pay attention, you just didn't account for it. We'll go ahead and do the rest of the cuts. All right, so we have all of the cuts on there. We can kind of scroll down and you can see them all. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to print screen this right here. And then I'm going to go through all of my cutting. I'm going to go part 1 through 2. I'm going to check it off to make sure that it is, no kidding, the cut that I want. And once it is, I will check that part off, and I will also label the part. I'm going to say that's part 1, part 2 as I go through. So later on, so 2 things. One is I make sure that I get the cut order and I'm cutting everything in relation to the correct things. And then 2, when I go back and it says, you know, part number, say number 9 on there, I go like, okay, well, where was part 9? Where'd that piece come from? Oh, that's that one right there. And I can identify it easily when I go back into assembly, which will be in the next video. We're going to put this into Dragon Cam, and then we're going to cut it out on the Dragon A250. And then I'm going to weld it together with my new welder, the Harbor Freight Pro TIG 205. Can't wait to use that thing. You'll see it in the next episode.
All right, this is Trooper right now, and we are 2 months from the Mint 400. We got to do the suspension, we got to get seats in, all the safety gear, electrical, and all that stuff. We got to paint it. We got to still paint this thing. And then the roll cage too. And here's the cool thing about BendTech is that we've already done the hard work. The The dimensioning is difficult, figuring out how you want the design to happen. And once you get down to the manufacturing part and you unleash the power of the Dragon A250, you're printing money. It just happens quickly. If you are interested to see how last time I built a roll cage was for my boys Razor 200 EFI, I'll try to put that video down here. Also the playlist for this whole build. Hopefully we've earned your subscribe today, and even more important, if you turn on notifications by clicking on the bell that's on the screen. That might be the only way that you find out that one of our weekly videos is coming out, and we sure do hope to see you then. Take care of yourself.